Thanks for coming out early this morning to one of the first events at the Catholic Imagination Conference. I'm Anthony Domestico. I'm going to be introducing our two poets today and then facilitating a conversation after their readings. When Michael Murphy emailed me in 2018 asking if I had any dream invitees for the Catholic Imagination Conference, I wrote back, I think within seconds, certainly within minutes, and said Fanny, Howe, and Lawrence Joseph. They are, I think, two of our greatest living American poets, both displaying a vision that is deeply informed in ways obvious and subtle by their Catholic faith. So it's really my honor to be presenting them both to you today. And as you'll hear, though Fanny and Larry differ in many ways, Larry is a great Detroit and New York City poet, while Fanny's recent work journeys more frequently to the streets of Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the green landscapes of Ireland. They also share a great deal. Both are formally accomplished, writing with precision and wit and visionary beauty. In their poetry and their prose, both look to the injustices of contemporary history, war, terrorism, the traumas of poverty and racism, and both answer such injustices with a vision of love. For both poets, the perception of love amid suffering is an aesthetic, political, and theological act, a patient and disciplined scene that pierces through our unjust social systems and looks at the particular lives underneath these systems. Fanny Howe is the author of more than 30 books, some poetry, some prose, many a mixture of the two. Her 2014 book of poetry, Second Childhood, was a finalist for the National Book Award. Her latest collection, Love and I, will be published by Grey Wolf in a little over a week. Lawrence Joseph, the Tinley Professor of Law at St. John's University School of Law, is the author of numerous books of poetry, including 2017's So Where Are We?, a nonfiction novel called Lawyerland, and a collection of essays, The Game Changed. His selected poems, titled A Certain Clarity, will be published by Fair, Strauss & Giroux in March of 2020. So please join me in welcoming both Fanny Howe and Lawrence Joseph.
I'd rather just sit. Hello? Can you hear me? No. Okay, thank you. Today, as it happens, is the beginning of a wonderful children's march against climate change. And the young woman who's 15 who started all of this, you all must know, is Greta Thunberg, who is a Swedish child, really. And she wrote a sentence that I love. She said, all my life, I've been the invisible girl. And now she's this triumphant speaker for nature. So just to remember that while I'm here. I'm going to read pretty short poems from two of my collections. I'll start with one from Love and I. On a cold day near Lake Erie, I was in a double bind. The snow was like a lamb shorn in the upper circle. Someone pushed me over the ice and stones. Someone else chattered behind. A rubber nipple was pressed on my lips, gagged and spat until my tears were milk. Everything seemed like something else. The number of wheels was too large for my body to contain in a dream, but the silver bar could be seen to be long, with faces beaming in reflection. From the land of the living, I thought I saw a flock impaled on a fence, then more clouds, God-free, overhead. 0 and 1 sat on either side of me. Was trapped in apparatus and a family, like so many before and after. A central contradiction once discovered leads to collapse or evolution. The tremors in the heavens created weather. We all mentioned this for years when we met on our quest for happiness. And then I thought I would go back to earlier poems. This book was published in 2003, and it still weirdly seems relevant. And this is probably written in a state of doubt, extreme doubt, after I converted 20 years before I wrote this little set of poems, and you can see I was already on the downward slope. So this poem is called The Descent. The descent has deepened, the interior lengthened, designated ending. Blind pulled down inside and then shot up again. To see east via the plate glass, a moon, a monsoon, an ashram. I used time almost wantonly in that bald but sensual sky to give me gusts and more measurement, not to snap the stars shut. But Joseph said, you really ought to tender how you sail by eye. Your soul is just a length of baby. The children turned back to me from eternity, uncertainly. Notes a bird chipped off, natality repeating its stock. They were nearly human, and I was happy to see a mouth in a face, not coldly attentive, saying, I think, but beings poured back onto Baggage Street, each against the wall, dreamily eating. The source. The source, I thought, was Arctic, the good platonic. Up the pole was soaked film, an electric elevation onto a fishy platform, and waves on two sides, greenly welcoming. The sun water poured on holy atheism. It was light that powered out my ego or my heart before ending with a letter. Back to the word. I'm just going to read from my newest book, which apparently is not even out yet. This is called No Beginning, and it's from the story of Moses on the mountain, which is such a beautiful story. Stop in your tracks, take off your shoes, close your eyes. The word knows what to do. For the blind, touching is seeing. Home, in. The word is like a flood in shape and speed. You will like the way it rushes east and west at the same time, echoes and solidifies and breaks apart. It streams like a northern light, but it's the word. The word makes no sound. The word never made no sound, and will not ever, out of parched minds and tongues, break this law. The word is not particles or waves or tangles. It runs all around. The word wrote itself and continues to write, stuffs the papyrus away in space, invisible ink, and yet it runs. It runs ahead of the mouth of the West. It meets itself, running the other way. If you want to appear, turn to another. The word lives alone everywhere, lives as a pariah, that attentive listeners will know by ear. The word doth say and attend only to this sad refrain, listen, we did our best. And I was always moved by God, who you expect to be very bad-tempered when Moses gets there, says, take off your sandals, you've come far enough. I thought that was very comforting. And I was just going to read from this last set called The First Church. One dawn I crawled out of the gutter into the common, just a woman in tears. A group of children was snoozing nearby. "Don't wake us up," they cried as if they were half alive. I kneeled on my rug and swatted the air. Sandwiches and small canteens were spilled nearby. Flies delivering maggots gathered around. "I hate buzzing sounds," I said to the kids. "Shut up," a little boy cried. "I'm dreaming." Where is the child I came here to save? Is it that little slave they made in the lab, a creature created to be put to work at once? It has no feelings, just what they want. In the end, they threw it in the sewer like a tin soldier who had no passport. Then the boys and girls lift their arms over their heads. Hands up, don't shoot. And the day has only 4 words we can believe. Sorry. A dirty girl had her own sunbeam that stayed by her side. When she stood on her head, all life long it was the beam assigned to her, a bolt, a thread, and shining honor. Sometimes it covered her like a shawl, sometimes it lay down with her shadow, sometimes it sat by her side protectively, and other times it sparkled in her hair like an aura. She laid out a patch of grass as an offering to the inevitable, woven of vetch, pinks, a gentian, and a daisy. It showed her family loafing and had a brown dog watching. My friend before dying gave me a flower that never needed water. She always needed water. The shrub was still there by the back door of the house, and all the trees were present. This is the past I can give you as you fly ascendant by. But most importantly, please visit her and soothe those you created now in agony. I'll just go on to the lamb. The plurality, this poem is called The Lamb. And it's a little set like most of mine are. The plurality of the apple makes us dare to pulp. Can we breed lambs without seeing meat? This is my body I cannot eat. Once the lambs were tender toward the shepherd. Now they shall want to take his eyes off them. Lamb unremembered, so many hanging and days spent fenced in, split lips for laughter to be released, or songs or bleats, memories ejected onto canvas or score, or brains where they burned their impressions in. Spray, dispersion, atoms up close for crying. They had no bleat without a mother to create and hear it. Not the lamb, its fleece, eyes, meat, tongue, heart are tied up for a factory. At first there were folds, now there are millions of mass-produced bundles of wool wrapped on hooks for the fridge and the loom. And this is the last. My shepherd's a figure invisible to all. The sheep, little siblings of no harm done. Bridal curls, pre-cotton in the clover. A smile without content, pink and sweet. From meadow to meadow, eternal grass. My shepherd of the flock, stay close. I can't breathe. Wherever you go twice is blessed. Thank you.
Thank you, Fanny. It's a real honor to be reading with you. And thank you for everyone here at Loyola for putting on this wonderful conference. I'm going to be reading a set of poems beginning with actually the first poem in my first book, which was published in 1983, through to my most recent book. And the first poem in my first book, I wrote when I was a senior in college at the University of Michigan, and that would have been 50 years ago. And it's entitled, it's not titled, it's a prologue poem for my first book. I was appointed the poet of heaven. It was my duty to describe Teresa's small roses as they bent in the wind. I tired of this and asked you to let me write about something else. You ordered, sit in the trees where the angels sleep and copy their breaths in verse. So I did, and soon I had a public following. St. Agnes with red cheeks, St. Dorothy with a moon between her fingers, and the hosts of heaven. You said, you failed me. I told you, I'll write lovelier poems, but you answered, you've already had your chance. You will be pulled from a womb into a city. Curriculum vitae. I might have been born in Beirut, not Detroit, with my right name. Grandpa taught me to love to eat. I am not Orthodox or Sunni, Shiite or Druze. Baptized in the one true church, I too was weaned on St. Augustine. Eisenhower never dreamed I wore corrective shoes. Ford Motor Company never cared, I'd never forgive. Highland Park, River Rouge, Hamtramck. I memorized the Baltimore Catechism. I collected holy cards, prayed to a litany of saints to intercede on behalf of my father, who slept through the sermon at 7 o'clock Mass. He worked 2 jobs, believed himself a failure. My brother believed himself. My sister denied. In the 5th grade, Sister Victorine, astonished, listened to me recite from the book of Jeremiah. My voice changed. I wanted women. The Jesuit whose yellow fingers cracked with the stink of camels promised me eternal punishment. How strange I was with impure thoughts, brown skin, obsessions. You could tell by the way I walked, I possessed a lot of soul. You could tell by the way I talked, I didn't know when to stop. After I witnessed stabbings outside the gym after the game, I witnessed fire in the streets. My head set on fire in Cambridge, England, in the Wynn Cafe. After I applied substance and procedure and statements of facts, my head was heavy. It was earth. Now years have passed since I came to the city of grape fame. The same sun glows gray on 2 new rivers. Tears I want do not come. I remain many different people whose families populate half Detroit. I hate the racket of the machines, the oven's heat, curse bossmen behind their backs. I hear the inmates' collective murmur in the jail on Beaubien Street. I hear myself say, what explains the Bank of Lebanon's liquidity? Think, I too will declare a doctrine upon whom the loss of language must fall, regardless whether Wallace Stevens understood senior indebtedness in Greenwich Village in 1906. One woman hears me in my sleep plead the confusions of my dream. I frequent the Cafe Dante, earn my memories, repay my moods. I'm as good as my heart. I'm as good as the unemployed who wait in long lines for money. When one is feeling one's way, it's actually a phrase that Wallace Stevens uses it in a letter, I think. It's a poem in 4 small parts. 1, the sky was red and the earth got hot, like 100 degrees hot, I mean. Stay cool, the monk was said to have said. You've still got a long way to go. A monk, say, of Way, who, in protest, who, to protest the killing of innocents, is dragging an altar on, yes it was, Hillside Avenue. So what else is new? One new voicemail message. A woman, a certain woman, has been seeing eyes, liquid blue eyes, glistening with tears. Two things, the two things that are interesting are history and grammar. And among the foundations of the intelligence, the chemistries of words. The fault lines of risk concealed in a monetary landscape, what of it? Nothing but the same resistance since the time of the Gracchi, against the arrogation by private interest of the Commonwealth, against the precious and the turgid language of pseudo-erudition, thugs of what they are, false voice God talkers and power freaks who think not at all about what they bring down. 3, a pause. Any evening, every evening. When one is feeling one's way, the pattern is small and complex. That center a moral issue, but composed and first. Looks to me like across the train yards, a blurred sun setting behind the high ground on the other side of the Hudson, over her overhead purple and pink. A changing set of marginal options, whole lots of amplified light. 4, oh, I get the idea. That image, the focal point of a concave mirror, is old, and that which is unintermittent and fragile, wild and fragile. There behind the freighter's yellow puffs of smoke, God knows I haven't forgotten it, I said. Still fragile, still proud. I'd like to read sections from a long poem, which was in the same book, my book Into It, which When One Is Feeling One's Way is in. It's a poem in 12 parts, and I'll read several of the parts from it, the small sections. 1. Why not say what happens? 1. Of icons, of divination, of gods. Repetitions without end. I have it in my notes, a translation from the Latin, a commentary in the book of Revelation. The greater the concentration of power on earth, the more truth is stripped of its power. The holiest innocent in eternity is as though slain. Has nothing to do with the apocalyptic. The 7-headed beast from the sea, the 2-horned beast from the earth have always, I know, I've studied it, been with us. Me, I'm only an accessory to particular images. 2. According to the translation of the police transcript, the sheik, the arrested head of the cell, mockingly said, in a plot involving a chemical attack, needs simply 2 or 3 young men and with brains and training with nothing to gain or lose, not an army. Doesn't take much these days to be a prophet. You know how much poison can be put into a 10-liter barrel? You pour it and spread it, then you leave. The web is, prosecutors believe, so intricate that a detainee, they think, may also be a member of cells in Barcelona and Frankfurt. In section 5. That period of 10 or 11 years, concerning it, I can express myself briefly. At some point in collective time, electronic space turned into time. The miraculous multiplication of loaves was restricted to the rentiers. A grappa in a black pyramid-shaped bottle was taken cognizance of, and, with no resistance for the most part, no guarantees were made for the slow, the meek, for the poor of spirit, who, for reasons unexplained, allowed themselves to disappear into the long red evenings, night's early gray blues. 7. Have I mentioned my grandmother? My father's mother, who died long ago, but who visits me in dreams. It's to her mostly I owe the feeling that, in cases of need, those transfigured in eternal love help us certainly with eternal and perhaps also with temporal gifts. That, in eternal love, all is gratis. All that comes from eternal love is gratis. 7. My father was a worker. I can still hear him getting up in the morning to go to work. Sadness, too, has to be learned. It took my father time to learn it, but he did. Though when he did, his tears were never chronic. As for the economies on which my parents' lives depended, they won't be found in any book. 10. Capital? Careful. Capital capitalizes, assimilates, makes its own substance, revitalizing its being. A vast metabolism absorbing even the most ancient exchanges, running away, as the cyberneticians put it, performing as it does its own anthropomorphosis, its triumph, the triumph of mediation. And let's not forget that organizes. Capital organizes. Capital is an organizing social forms. In the final section in this poem, I remember it. The gold burnt into gold, the gold on gold and on white and yellow, an incandescence condensing the sunlight, outburning the sunlight, the factory molten, the sun behind it, in it, thin gold pig iron, a spray of fire, flywheels revolving through the floor, rims almost reaching the roof, enormous engines throwing great pounding cylindrical arms back and forth as if the machines are playing a game, trying to see how much momentum can be withstood before one or the other gives way. And remember, down south, 6th to Downing, to Varick, down Varick, downtown. A cat is in the rubbish in the street. Sun over Jersey, the gap at the end of West Street, the sun on the clock tower. The melancholy induced by the pressure of time, the wavering ambitions, failed ideas, time wasted. The unexpected breeze, warm, the sense of the river, the sky blue, dark blue, yet pure in color, not blackened or tarnished above the low, old buildings, like a painting of something solid rather than the solid thing itself, a high and low composition. But what light there is in that landscape. I have to read 3 more poems. My wife and I, was, I think, encoded in the 2 most recent, the 2 poems I just read, lived near, was categorized as ground zero in southern Manhattan. And so I'm going to read 2 poems that deal with that, and that throughout the poems that I've written since that event. So where are we? So where were we? The fiery avalanche headed right at us, falling, flailing bodies in midair. The neighborhood under thick gray powder on every screen. I don't know where you are. I don't know what I'm going to do, I heard a man say. The man who had spoken is myself. What year? Which Southwest Asian war? Smoke from infants' brains on fire from the phosphorus, hours after they're killed. Killers reveling in the horror. The more obscene, the better. The point at which 100,000 massacred is just a detail. Acid and credit bubbles about to burst. Too much consciousness, too much at once. A tangle of tenses and parallel thoughts, a series of feelings overlapping a sudden sensation felt and known, whose chains of small facts repeated endlessly in the depths of silent time. So where are we? My ear turns like an animal's. I listen. Like it or not, a digital you is out there. Half of that city's buildings aren't there. Who was there when something was, and a witness to it? The rich boy general conducts the Pakistani heroin trade on satellite phone from his cave. On the top floor of the Federal Reserve, in an office looking onto Liberty at the South Tower's one-time space, the Secretary of Treasury concedes they got killed in terms of perceptions. 10 blocks away, the Church of the Transfiguration. In the back, a Byzantine Madonna. There's a God who fits the drama in a very particular sense. What you said, the memory of a remembered memory, the color of a memory, violet and black. The lunar eclipse on the winter solstice, the moon a red and black and copper hue. The streets, the harbor, the light, the sky, the blue and cloudless, intense and blue morning sky. That's September and October. And then we were evacuated. Minds snapped and snapping snapped back in the fundament of things. When you said, explosions so fierce you feared your eardrums punctured. The building shook and moved so much you thought it would crash. I was, you said, thinking of you so much you hoped. You said, not too many were dead. Afraid that if this is war, a chemical warfare agent is in the air. You couldn't see a thing. Heavy, mud-colored, swirling brown, black, gray. Fine dust particles looked like a solid curtain of nightmare, you said. And you said you were frightened. And tower fragments the size of football fields falling in every direction. Seawater pumped from the Hudson through hoses attached to fire trucks near West Street. And at night, candles lit at windows to let the others know they're not alone. Small park across Queens Boulevard, the leafless oak against the dark green dusk air, strips of shadow along the pavement's edge. 27th Sunday in ordinary time. And how long, my God, have I cried out the violence to you, but you do not intervene? How long have I cried out for help, my God, but you do not listen? From the book of the prophet Habakkuk. Today, sunny and windy, blustery tonight and cold. Marines and Army may scour caves, U.S. General says, headline in the Times. No longer in the government, but on the inside with those in the government, the Taliban in Afghanistan won't last another month, he says. Sudan, or maybe next to Bekaa Valley, but Iraq. There's no evidence Iraq was involved, but we feel it is. We feel it, he says. And anyway, he smiles, conditions are now ideal to take it. Acid mist, volatile organic compounds, dangerous levels of asbestos, rising and spiraling white steam, blowtorch produced green vapor pit fumes, white stinking, transformed in pink light until clouds of smoke obscure it. A common fate pain can't forget, incessantly pulled apart in this memory's light. And the last poem is a very short poem from my last book, entitled And for the Record. The angels return in this one. Revelations reoccurring. He who is babbling away in James Madison Plaza, and what goes around, what comes around, light made holy by the fury of the tears with which it mingles. Simple enough when looked at directly, the child, shy and fearful, who won't speak. And for the record, the mind like the night has 1,000 eyes. Sparrows in the bushes, a small cat rolls in the snow, sleep pounding the windows. In the space of a memory, the facade of a church, an angel on each side of a fiery wheel. Thank you.
Thank you to you both for those lovely readings. So, as we all know, the guiding title for this conference is The Catholic Imagination, and in various panels over the next few days, people are going to be thinking about what the Catholic imagination has meant, and Dante and modernism and other previous moments, what it means now and what it might mean in the future. And I'm interested, just to begin our conversation, by hearing what you think the Catholic imagination means for you as poets. What is it, another way of phrasing that, I suppose, what is it that imaginatively has drawn you and continues to draw you to Catholicism?
Well, I think it goes way out, like the halo. It's always pushing away from the limits of history, of daily life even, that the way human gestures and actions are dealt with in the parables and in the developing theologies give you a sense that there's a potential to do otherwise, to be otherwise. And that I'm sort of on the side of the mystical end of the church, if it is a church.
I think about this a lot because my imagination is very much rooted in Catholicism, and just individually is, and in a collective sense through family and through the communion of the Catholic faith, and has been from the time I was a child, and very much influenced by family and place, Detroit, and the Catholic world of Detroit during the historical time that I've lived, and so the side of it sort of permeates everything. It and has from the beginning permeated everything. It's not the only thing. I mean, I have other types of subjects, but most of the subjects actually return back into my Catholicism. The anti-war, the hatred of violence, capital punishment, the social side, anti-imperialism, anti-capitalism. All of those are part of the Catholic magisterium, and I'm very much rooted in, theologically for me, is that God decides to become totally human and then dies at the imperial state of Rome, is tortured and then put to death by the state. And so that's really fundamental to my sense of my Catholic imagination. I also have a mystical side. I think all poets have mystical sides. What Fanny said about the mystical side in Catholicism, the mystical side in Catholicism has its own side. As Fanny said, there's this sense of the halo or the sacred, and the sacred infuses everything. So this is a matter of if you're writing poetry with imagination as a Catholic, of getting inside that side that all poets are in, but we're being Catholic, and the Catholic faith informs it in a different way that plays out in our poetries, I think.
So Fanny, you said that you're interested in, you feel called by the more mystical side of the Catholic tradition. It also seems to me that all of our listeners, I think, and your readers would acknowledge that you're both very much interested in history and politics. And I'm interested to hear both of you reflect, Larry, you began to there, a little bit on how you personally first encountered the church's kind of social or political vision, and how that has informed how you think about your own role as a poet responding to history and to politics.
Right. Well, I grew up in a very politically aware household, and then I had no equipment for dealing with the world because I was a bad student. So I had to enter New York City, as we all had to enter it at some point, unequipped. And I could see very clearly that way the monstrosities around and the terrible effects of weighted capitalism. My father was accused of being a communist by McCarthy, and so I grew up in that atmosphere already, of looking at it, the world from the ground up rather than the up down. And so for me, I was born in 1940 with the war, so that shadowed my childhood, my father going away for 5 years. I was always shadowed in history, and that has remained true. So part of the looking beyond history was in poetry, in all the arts, and philosophy too. So that would be. I mean, I was in the civil rights movement and all of that, but in the end, I would say it's a way of seeing the whole story, the whole of reality. And we have to sort of get beyond Walter Benjamin, who's so great and so powerful a thinker, but he casts melancholy. I mean, there's a kind of circle of melancholy around him. And so we need to try to cut through that in some way if we can, because it weighs you down.
I was educated in Catholic grade schools. My parents didn't go to college, and they went to, my grandparents came from Lebanon and Syria, Catholics, and then my parents were born in the United States, and they went to Catholic grade schools and high schools. They didn't go to college, and then my generation, we all had gone to college, and we went to Catholic grade schools, and I went to the Jesuit high school in Detroit, which had an enormous influence on me. I was aware of historically, I come from a family, and part of this is just the history of immigration, of a certain group of immigrants, but group of immigrants from Lebanon and Syria who are sort of famous for their storytelling and their historical sense. And they were very aware of not only their, especially the family history, and that it was very much linked to Detroit. And I was born in 1948, so the Detroit I inherited was the post-war Detroit and the Detroit of my parents and my grandparents. And so Detroit's history is my history, and the first real round of my history, of course, and then with the history of growing up Catholic in Detroit, and very much part, and my family very much part of not only the Catholic Detroit, but Arab American Detroit. And they were among the first Arab American immigrants to Detroit, my grandparents, and so there's inter-family connections. And so the politics are the politics that were occurring in the United States from 1948 to present in Detroit. And Detroit virtually took on all politics in the United States because it was the center of industrial capital in the entire world. And that became, I was aware of this and aware of the social encyclicals at a very young age. In grade school, I was aware of Rerum Novarum and the social encyclicals, and that much had to do with Detroit. And so that really is the center of it for me. And then when I go to New York, and my wife and I moved to New York in our early 30s, and then it's a different type of capital. And then we get what capitalism had done to Detroit, and which is part of my history. And then we get finance capital in Manhattan, which is And I'm aware of, I'm a lawyer, and I've always been aware of capital and labor and poor, and what it does to the poor. And so that's my political economy. It's a historical political economy. Well, plus the theology. I mean, the theology is there, very much there and rooted in it.
So I think from the selections of poems that you read, we could hear that you're both poets who are interested and committed to witnessing, telling the brutalities of our moment, and thinking about the brutalities of capitalism, thinking about police brutality. But in both of your poems, there's also a countervailing force of love pushing back against the brutality that you're so often looking quite closely and quite painfully at. And Fanny, your most recent book is called Love and I. Larry, you've talked before about how all of your books are books on love. And so I was wondering, this is obviously a general question that we could ask any poets, but I'm interested in how you think about the relationship between love and the poetic act. So love in the writing of poetry. Does it arise from love? Does it lead to love? Yeah.
I think of love as like a little elf, a little invisible sprite that's around. And so it's not, it's part of every production of art is trying to give form and flesh to that little strange figure that goes everywhere with us. And so I see love as being not so much in me, or unless there's complete catastrophe. But on a daily basis, I would say love is a little dancing figure and not permeating everything. Mm-hmm. But definitely it's there. But I'm one of those people who doesn't believe God loves me. So that's, a lot of us feel that way. So that's part of the love dilemma. Oh, you couldn't hear me? Oh, dear. Oh, this way? Okay, I was just saying I'm one of those people who does not believe God loves me. So love for me is something, a kind of coming out rather than coming down. And that's just a personality defect, I suppose.
I don't think it's a defect at all. And share everything that you said really quite eloquently. I believe that love is fundamental, and it's what makes us survive, and fight and give, and I also believe it's a gift to be able to see it and to feel it, independent of God. It's a human gift. Where that gift comes from, I don't know. I think one thing poets do, and I think every poet does this, I think writing poetry is an act of love. It's an act of human dealing with language, which is your wonderful, beautiful poem on the word, and the various dimensions at every level, philosophically, theologically, referencing the word, which is the poets deal with language, and language is what makes us human, and poets believe that. And we explore language at every single level. And part of the level of language is the language of belief and hope and love and the human. And I think that's where poets are. I was at the Catholic Worker with Marie Ponceau, and one of the questions was to both of us whether we thought that poetry was prayer. And we both sort of laughed and said, yes, poetry is prayer. Poetry is a form of prayer.
Can I just add something to that? I was very influenced by Simone Weil, and I think sometimes attention is something that she beautifully put her attention to. And to me, that is more than love. I would say the full attention is what comes to me with writing poems.
Larry, I know you're also have been influenced by Simone Weil.
Yes.
I don't know
Have
if you
you?
can speak to that.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's more, it's exactly what I believe is, it's that attention. Poetry is really an ultimate act of attention, of language at every level, and expression, and human expression at every level. And we all live in it, and are grateful to poets for that, for doing that. And there's nothing really courageous in it. You pretty much have to do it. So, but yeah, it's attention. It's that, and attention is prayer. And Simone Weil would say the same thing. That's an act of the most human, and it's often against God. It's the attention that God isn't paying attention to what God should be paying attention to.
Now, obviously, you're both at this conference, so I suppose at a certain level you're okay with being described as a Catholic poet. But I'm interested in how you would think about that as one of your many identities, as also as a poet of labor, right? As a mystical poet. Are you comfortable being described as a Catholic poet?
Yes, because of the multi-faceted part of that word Catholic, but and that identity. But other people don't like you very much if you're Catholic, especially in the academic world.
Yeah.
It's not a good thing. So we're living in such a secular paradise right now that, if you believe there's a much bigger invisible place out there, that's not a very well-loved thing to say.
Is that something that you concern yourself with in the writing of your poetry, the secular readership in universities, or the people who are buying collections by Grey Wolf might kind of press back against your deeply Catholic sense, or are you just responsible to the work and you don't worry? Oh, sorry. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, sorry, that was my fault. So I was just asking. So Fanny was talking about being a Catholic writer in a secular world, and I'm wondering if that is something that you're thinking about in the actual composition of your poems. Are you worrying about whether a secular readership is going to push back against your mystical sense, or are you just ultimately responsible to the work and to the mystical sense?
Definitely the latter. I mean, I never think about that anybody ever will read any poem I ever write. And I never read my reviews. I don't like knowing I exist at all. So.
No, I don't object. And in terms of the way the rest, I agree with Fanny in the way the rest of the world responds to it. I really don't care. It's not why I'm writing it. I'm writing it out of writing poems. The identity, I have a number of identities, and we all do it. We all have a number of identities, even if we profess. I like to say I profess to being Catholic. In other words, if someone says that you're Catholic, I don't say, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
It's like, and why do I say that? Well, there's a lot of reasons why I don't say that. And what Fanny said, that what's embodied in the word Catholic and the Catholic faith in terms of the human history is much of that, and that's the belief side of it. But the primary identity when I'm writing poems is a poet. Mm-hmm. That's primary to any other identity. So the ultimate issues of writing a poem are aesthetic issues, and the issues of all the kinds of things that go into making a poem. And so the persons that and that side of it is where, that's the dominant side when I'm writing poems. Mm-hmm. If I'm doing something else, then I have different types of identity side of it, and I deal with identity because that's what's in our society. It permeates all thought, and it always has. But in American society at this point, We don't have to do much, you know. And I wrote about identity, my book Curriculum Vitae dealt with identity in the 1980s. And now we get these cycles and transmogrifications, really, of the questions of identity. But the primary identity is the poet, and all the issues of going and writing poetry, all of the tradition of American poetry and poetry throughout time. And that's where I live ultimately. And there have been poets who have identified themselves as Catholics, very great poets. And so I don't think identifying oneself with one religion or other really makes that much difference. If that's what you need to do, you do it. Poets go out of the compulsions they need to write poems.
So Larry, I think that one of the lines from a poem you read today was that, what was it, that the two essential things are history and grammar?
Yeah, I lifted that from Gertrude Stein. It's in her little green integer book on history, and it struck me as true, as Gertrude Stein frequently strikes me as making true statements.
Yeah. And I'm wondering what, again, because you're both writers who seem attuned to use Simone Weil's word, attentive to history and to our particular historical moment. And you both, Larry, you published a book just 2 years ago called So Where Are We, right? Thinking about where we are in our particular moment. And Fanny, you have just are in the midst of publishing a book. So I'm wondering, what are the particular challenges you see for poets generally, or for Catholic poets specifically, at our very particular historical moment? So you actually prefaced your reading today, Fanny, by talking about one challenge for all of humanity right now, which is maybe the challenge for humanity, climate change. But what do you think are the particular responsibilities or challenges for the poet in 2019?
Well, you see, the thing is that we change as the times change. So we don't have the same impulses that the younger people do now. Our whole system is wired differently, which is true throughout the ages. To me, the kids writing hip hop are the greatest poets around. They're marvelous. Childish Gambino is just a great poet. And so it's unpredictable. I can't see, but I have complete faith that poetry will always be part of us, part of the world. And poetry for me is in everything. It saturates everything. And certainly all the arts are poetic. So I think it's going to be here. It will always be here. But the real trouble is our problem as from an earlier generation is how to adapt to the internet and the social media and all of that. That's our problem. The kids will figure it out.
Yeah, I agree entirely. People will write poems for whatever reasons they write them, and with other level of intensity they write them. There will be persons who identify themselves as Catholic who will be writing poems, and it changes. It changes with the world we live in. Certainly, American society. If you identify yourself as an American poet, but even beyond that, just as a poet in the world. And now the interconnections in the world are especially, around the fact that the extinction of the planet kind of unites us all in a way of resistance and witness that I think is going to be fundamental, more and more fundamental to poetry. As we have this, we've never had a situation before where we've had to collectively confront the possible extinction of the planet, and an awareness now the children are having, and they will have, every child being born now will have that at a very young age. And I think that will change the consciousness, and then it'll change the way poets deal with their consciousness. And It's the wonderful feeling about having done this a long time is that the kind of joy knowing that there will continue to do this with a ferocity and an intensity that we've tried to bring to it.
So Fanny, you mentioned poetry being present in all different art forms, right? And I know that you're particularly interested in film. Right? And Larry, you strike me as, so your wife is a painter, and you strike me as a very painterly poet, among other things. And so I guess, first of all, Fanny, I'm interested in hearing more about what you mean in saying that there is poetry in all art forms. Right? What do you mean by poetry in saying that there's poetry in all other art forms? And how do you think about, you've spoken really beautifully about how film editing has helped you, or thinking about film editing has helped you in the composition of your own works of prose and poetry. And so just if you could think for us a little bit about your own relationship to other artistic mediums, film or painting.
Oh, okay. Well, I do love movies more than life. I should say that right away. But I think that the whole weirdness of film, by having things moving around in front of us, and finding an order in that movement is very similar to the mind at work in any field at all. It's the combined intention and coincidence that come together with moving thoughts, moving forms, the search for something to stop, that for a certain thing to be able to stop for a moment, to stop moving. So it was sort of in that poem, The Word, that it's always moving away, moving back, moving out. And the motion picture, to me, is the art form now that captures that kind of thinking better than any other. And that'll probably be replaced. So who knows what comes next. But for me, a painting is a poem, because the parts come together for a minute and coalesce, and you can recognize it. So the goal is recognition.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is poets compose. I like the word compose. They make poems, and composition is at the core of all art making. In other words, forming it, and as you said, putting pieces together that suddenly you get this, your eye moves around you, painting or film or any art form. And the person creating it, or the persons creating it, or forming it and composing it. And poetry is the most, it's language. It's composing language and putting language together. And language is central to that part of the human being. And which is a central part of the human being. So there's poetry, that kind of intense compression, composition, the aesthetic act in every art. And so that's to me the poetic. It's not the imagery or anything like that. It's the act of making something, of making an object of art.
Yeah, which again involves that important word that we've returned to a couple of times, attention, right? Yes. Attention in the act of composition, to language, to grammar, to history. And then that's the magic of the act of reading poetry as well, that we can attend to language and attend to the world more powerfully because of the attention of the artist. But we're just about out of time, so could we please all thank Fanny and Larry for a wonderful reading and a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.